on this episode, we have two guests. You're very familiar with them. One is Simon Stiles, and his relevancy to this topic is that he is a very experienced towboat operator, and he
not very experienced. I'm a mildly experienced towboat operator,
if you say so.
I can do my own creds, man.
Yeah,
I can do my own creds.
Yeah,
I've lived on a boat for 5 years. I've spent a lot of time rescuing derelict boats in the bays that I've lived in, and I worked for Seatow for a year. Had a good time, and that's it. I've sailed a bunch.
Yep.
On some small boats.
And Haley Martin is also joining us.
Who's that?
Who is
I'm
that?
with a box of shit.
And
It's nearly empty, unfortunately.
her credentials on this subject being a liveaboard and a diver, as well as a sailor. So a lot of diving requires a lot of intense. Well, you explain.
I'm a cold water diver. I only have 40 dives, but I'm rescue certified, and I'm also trained in the use of dry suits and a nitrogen blend of air. So
Yeah, and a lot can go wrong.
yeah, and I've also dived in Myanmar as well as like BC, Vancouver.
Oh my god, that's spicy.
It is spicy. Yeah, we're hitting the hot sauce. So today's episode is about good trip planning and poor trip planning. So basically, all of the things you can do to make sure you have a successful trip. Mostly short-term trips is what we're referring to. Long ocean crossings are a totally different subject. But then the other side of the same coin is that if you are doing a trip across the strait or just going out fishing, a lot can go wrong, and it's pretty. There's a lot of common pitfalls that happen. So it's a lot of this whole podcast is about good trip planning, poor trip planning, and how to assess if you are good or bad at it, and
But
all the tips we have for being good at it.
obviously, we are not the final authority on this, so
But
this is
we're
just
pretty damn good at it.
this is based off personal experiences and Simon and Barry as professional mariners. So,
Yeah.
but I mean, everyone will have different experiences and get into different situations. So
Yeah, my credentials with all of this is that I've got a lot of tickets, certifications for the marine industry, and some of them directly involve, especially the chart work ones, involve, for an example, on the chart work courses, you have to plan out, you are this size of vessel, and you are going through this narrow pass, and the tides are crazy, and so you have to write out an entire trip plan, and that's including anchoring for 3 hours and waiting for the tide to change and going through. So there's a lot of qualifications that I have regarding that, as well as when I was working with the Tall Ship Providence on the charter side of things. The last year I was working there, I was involved in all of the trip planning. So that was where we were heading, when we were, and I would arrange all of the mooring and contact the people months in advance to make sure we were ready.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of credentials revolving around that, and a lot of personal trips that I've done as well.
And nothing like experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, you do this stuff for a while. It's hard to get out there the first time. Like, it can be pretty nerve-wracking. So hopefully some of these tips that we're going to share with you will help you get out there.
Yeah.
Try it out.
So from a really basic perspective, what is trip planning? Trip planning is sitting down for, if it's like a 1-day trip or a 2-day trip, which is exactly what Haley and I are leaving on a 2-day trip tomorrow. And so what my process was involved around that, and what I find the good practices are for that. And one of the key things is obviously the charts. I use largely digital charts, fully ticketed in traditional chart work, but that's kind of a thing of the past. They're not even producing physical charts anymore, or in the very near future in British Columbia. So
That stopped this year.
I think it's this year they
Yeah,
stopped.
like 3 weeks ago.
And so a lot of it is digital navigation. My navigation of choice for around here is Navionics, and one of the basic things you can do before you go on a trip is plot out all of your points, where you're headed, and then look at that. Don't just, make sure when you're passing through a small area that has a port and a starboard marker buoy, like a tight channel, that you don't just haphazardly pass it on the wrong side. Make sure you kind of think through which side you're going on.
A good example of that is Thrasher out here, and also just like the entryway into Gabriel. It was at the south entrance.
Eastern entrance.
Eastern entrance.
Yeah, it's a lot of zigzagging.
You think that you're gonna go port side of the marker buoy, but you actually need to go onto the starboard side, and it's really not obvious that there's rocks there almost
So
any time.
I like to think that you see a marker, and there's a reason they put the marker there, because your navigation is not obvious.
Yeah.
Right? So you see a marker, and it's left of center or right of center. In the case of the eastern entrance, let's put that one in. It's right of center.
Is that one a cardinal buoy?
No. It's
See, that's why it's confusing.
the cardinal buoys on the northern entrance.
Oh.
We have one of those too, and it's a similar story where there's 2/3 of the channel is on one side and 1/3 on the other. And you got to remember, red right return, right? That's how I always remember. But it's just like we pick people off of the reef. We call it Shipyard Reef
Yeah.
That's
Because
literally
you call-
that. It's
yeah.
called that on the chart.
because you call the shipyard when you hit it,
Yeah.
and the shipyard is unfortunately closed now. So you're
We're
just
in it right
SOL.
now.
We are the shipyard.
But yeah, it is like there's two different reasons people see it. They see there's a marker, and then there's this great big open water on the left hand side, and they go, well, that's where I should go. There's more water there, right?
Yeah.
So let's just go for it, and they drive right
Spoiler
over the
alert,
reef.
there's not more water there.
But honestly, I see this one all the time where people go, hey, we saw the reef, and it's like a blue blotch here and a blue blotch there,
Mhm.
and a light blue blotch there. But like there was this darker blue chunk in the middle, so I just went for that. It's like, no, man,
That's
you just
straight
avoid the
rock.
whole damn reef.
Yeah.
Like, just go to the deepest possible water.
Always check your depths where you're planning on going through.
Yeah.
So like make sure that there's factor in the size of your boat and the time of day, what the tide levels are at. So
Also, it's been super great having that depth.
having a depth sounder is critical.
On Thunderchild. We didn't have that on Dagon before.
That's actually a really good way to navigate a course. You can literally tell if your chart work is accurate based on the depths that it's showing you on your chart, on your digital chart or your physical chart. You can see that it says it's 27 feet here at this line, and when you cross over that and you cross over that
It's
line
a redundancy.
and it says
essentially.
27 feet, you're like, good, we're exactly where where the GPS is supposed to be telling. Never trust it 100%. It's telling you where you think you're supposed to be at.
We got to speak up a bit. We're getting some comments about how quiet we are.
Oh, dang, sorry.
I'm
about
so
that.
sorry.
Let's speak up. All right, wake it. But I will say, like, as per what I was saying a second ago, the charts are not accurate. Like the fact that people think that there's a little tiny channel that you can slip through on Shipyard Reef, and there definitely isn't. Like you see it on low tide, and there is nowhere for you to slip through there at all. But it shows up on the chart. There's like, oh, there's like a little crack there. People always go for it, and it does not work. So I like to keep my boat the deepest section I possibly can,
Absolutely.
pretty much at all times,
And
no
it's
matter
also-
what I'm piloting.
It's also with the depth sounder really good to know that if you're like, you're expecting 20 and 30 feet, and suddenly it starts rising up beyond that, then you need to veer off in whatever direction the chart tells you. So it's the lines on a chart that show you the depth changes are actually in themselves a really good method of navigating. You can you can pinpoint your location.
But they are general, very general.
And so the key for me is once I've laid out my basic course and I've thought about every pass as I'm going through it, I imagine where I'll be in it and what's a safe place on my lane of the highway, if you will. You have to kind of keep one side free for the oncoming vessels. Once I do that and I've got a good layout of it, I do a full zoom in on the whole courseware along the way in case there's, because when you're zoomed out on a digital chart, often...
Someone made a donation, which is
Holy shit.
Wow.
It's Wayne again.
Wayne.
It's Wayne
So-
again.
Actually,
Hell yeah, Wayne.
to rewind it a little bit,
More like Bruce Wayne.
Yeah, we didn't even fully get into this.
so what I'm going to do for this is I have set up what's called buy me a coffee is the website.
Beer.
But you can change the wording. So we have it set up for buy me a beer. We know our audience. But it's basically a mirror image of our patron account. And it's a lot cheaper for people to join up for and a lot easier financial transaction memberships, etc.
You don't need to make an account.
Yeah.
You can just give a one-time donation there. It's pretty straightforward. So
my
we're
plan,
giving it a shot.
my plan is for anyone who makes donations. So Wayne is the first person to make a donation. I'm gonna give. I can do giveaways on this. I can't do that on Patreon. I would if I could, but I can give away free access to the Buy Me a Coffee account. So Wayne, if you could please drop in your email address or email me at sailingdagon@gmail.com and give me your email address there. I'll give you a free access. I'll give you free access to our.
Obviously, Wayne, you deserve it.
Absolutely, and
love
anybody
it,
else
man.
who makes donations during this,
Yeah.
I will also give a free account to, as well.
It's
This
like a
poor
re-
boy
it's
needs
like a
electrical
reward.
system. He's got 3 light bulbs to light his whole home with, and we have a shopping list of electrical to get.
Absolutely.
So
I don't know. Sometimes the lights just go off, and Mary's like, "Did you turn the lights off?" And I was like, "No, do you turn the lights off?"
Yeah.
And then it just because we ran out of power.
yeah, all right. So we got some work to do.
And then on top of it, I will, Simon will, and Haley will.
And you get a car.
We're each gonna pick someone with good comments on this, good questions, good input, and we're each gonna pick one person who also gets one. So anybody who wants free access to our Patreon or buy me a beer.
Yeah, ask
Same
some good
thing.
questions. We need some good questions.
So-
Tom and Josie, by the way, say the pre-departure plan is don't forget the rum.
You ain't wrong.
Tom and Josie roll with like a pile. Was it Coors?
Can we
was
go
their-
sailing together? You
Yeah,
guys
because
sound-
they sound like a lot of fun.
You
You guys
sound
would get along with them great.
And then from there, I do a really thorough analysis of what the winds are at the time. So around here, we have a government website from Environment Canada, and they tell you the wind states, and they seem to be, in my experience, the most accurate.
Barry's like, I'm always off. Barry's always getting it right, and because he checked the Govy website.
And windy is cool, and windy is a good general thing to do, but I check both. So I check windy, and I check the Environment Canada website for the wind predictions, which will determine whether I'm pinned to a dock or being pulled off of a dock, and that changes my departure as well. But then, so I check wind, and then I check tides. And the key for the tides, especially around here with tight tidal passages, is that there is, if it's an ebb or a flood, it can really make a big difference as to whether you can make it through a pass at all. So tomorrow morning, for example, Haley and I are leaving, and we're heading into the Gulf Islands, and we're going to be going into
All the way down Trincomalee.
yeah, so we got to go through
It's
Gabriel.
a
Well,
and
you've
long,
got-
and it's a long
got,
way
like,
to Trinket Valley.
Is it 3 passes you got to think about for tomorrow? Like the main one's Gabriella,
Gabriel passes
right away.
Yeah, that's my main threat,
Right.
and
So
that's really the only thing. That's
that's a big one. But there's still 2 more past that. Trincomalee itself will get up to 2 knots of current, which will really
Absolutely.
affect your arrival time.
Yeah.
So my key for tomorrow mornings, I looked at on Navionics. There is often an indicator for current and how many knots you'll be facing. So I looked at it for the morning of the 29th, which is our departure time, and so we're coming down and around. So we gotta go through the pass this way, but the currents at like 5 in the morning are fighting us, but at 6 in the morning they turn and they come with us. But at like 7 in the morning, there's like 3 knots behind us, which is a little bit spicier than I want it to be. So we're leaving, and we're gonna hit it at the exact time that we want to go through, which is maybe a knot behind us.
Because we motor comfortably at 4.5 to 5 knots.
Yeah, and we can hammer it for 7, but also going through tidal passages, I don't like to use up 100% of my power to go through that tidal passage,
So
because if
realistically-
something goes sideways while you're slamming through there and you got no more juice to go, I always keep 40% throttle in the back burner, so I navigate as best I can, and if I gotta shoot out of there, I've still got more to go.
Dude, I
Yeah.
can totally foresee a scenario where I get SOL'd in Gabriella Pass or something like that, and I drop anchor. And just think about how much regen I'd get in Gabriella Pass.
Oh yeah, your motor,
Right?
Yeah,
Just like I'd be just full of electricity, just full of charge that back up.
So once I figured out the currents, that tells me my timing, and so now I know I'm getting through there at 6:30 in the morning. Then there's a basic calculation, so I know it's about 37 miles. So there's a calculation. Can you hand me that?
Oh, how
Wow.
convenient. We just had a clipboard with paper and a pen on it.
So there's a really,
This is a high production right here.
there's a triangle. It's a really cool calculation to know. It's called the DST calculation. So you do a triangle, the D goes at the top, and then you go S, T. So from here, it's divide, and then from here, it's times. So if you know your distance, which is about 30 something miles in this case, and you know your speed, we're probably going to be going at about 5 knots. So you go,
Keep in mind though, if the current is running 2 knots with us, we would probably slow down just so that we'd slow down to like 3 knots because then we'd be getting 5.
yeah, we could
Or
get
5 and a half.
free current.
Free
from the-
propulsion, yeah. And
So-
also it gives us some leeway.
So you take your distance, which is say 30 to keep it simple, and then you go divide by your speed, which let's say is 5 knots. Somebody else better at math than me, please do that.
6.
People.
6, yeah.
Equals your time.
So 6 hours.
So your time is 6 hours. So now we know we have 6 hours. But you can also do
But
this.
if you know that your distance is 30 and
You
the happy hour at the bar is over in 6 hours, then you
Oh,
know
yeah.
that you need to get there
and then
at a
And
speed of
thus-
5 knots
And
So
or
thus the
greater.
triangle.
yeah, now you know that you
Right.
need to hammer for 5 the whole time.
We're like, push it!
So the DST calculation is critical. You can do the same thing with times speed. So you go time, speed,
And that's how far you've gotten.
and that's
Which-
your distance. So it's a
Which, if you're dead reckoning or something like that, is handy, right?
absolutely. So this is one of the most basic methods you can use for calculating your distance, speed, or time in any direction on this triangle. As long as you do all distance is divide, and this is times and times this way, and you'll always end up with the accurate calculation.
We should just do flashcards of timetables.
Absolutely, I would love that. So that's a really, really basic, really simple way that you can, it gives you a reason to pre-plan your trip, because then you can sit there and think about that, because now I know that I'm going to be showing up in Sydney at about, I don't know, it's going to take me 7 hours based on the calculations.
Thought
I
it was
did.
6 hours.
I'm counting on us going a little slower, saving a bit of diesel.
You round up all. You're rounding down basically on everything, right? So
Oh, I got it. That's my beer.
You got a message.
I got a message right there
It's
from
his
you.
bud.
But so current, another critical thing with current,
rivers. Let's get into the rivers.
absolutely. So when you
Because
got,
I'm curious. Because
can you hand me that again?
I working for Cito for a year. Anytime it said Fraser River, which was the only river I'd ever go up, I just added an hour to.
Right.
I'd hit Sandheads, and then it was an hour to get to wherever I was going, towing somebody.
But the most critical thing I find for going in and out of
It's a lot.
any river
Towing.
is the direction of the river, so the current flow out of it, versus the wind direction. And there's
Right.
if they're in opposition to each other, I don't go. If it's over,
That's the same
25
thing
knots.
with that. I've seen Gabriella Pass with standing waves that are 5 feet tall.
Yeah. So if you have this river here, let's say this is the Fraser, and so it's got like 4 knots coming out of it, but then you know you have a northwest breeze that's pointed right at it, and if it's over 25 knots,
You're pretty much going to use a wall of water.
yeah, you're gonna get really huge waves.
Rollers.
Yeah,
It is literally like breaking surf right
Yeah.
there.
And that's where all of the deadliest places on Earth are, is a river or an ocean current where the wind is in opposition. This is where all the boat wrecks happen. This is where everything
It's
is
super
Cape Horn,
surreal,
all of
though.
it.
Because, like, say that was a tidal current, right? Instead of a river, and that was the other way. Calm condition.
Perfect.
Nice,
Perfect.
nice and easy to cruise through. It'd be 25 knots. Same, like it could be blowing, hauling ass 7 knots through that, and you'd be just fine.
So always just like take the time to look at the weather in combination with the current that you're about to fight.
Yeah.
If you're fighting current or flow with, and you just want to make sure that there's no wind against current.
Opposing forces.
And then especially if that wind against current is like, if you're on, so the Fraser River is really shallow, but the ocean is really deep. when you got deep ocean or deep ocean against either a river or more ocean that is really shallow, then those stacking up of waves that happen get even more intense. This is why Cape Horn is notoriously awful, is it actually shallows up from thousands of meters to hundreds of meters, and that's why it's so bad.
I've had the Gabriela Reef do the same thing to me, where it was 8-foot waves all the way across the strait, really nasty day, and we get to Gabriela Reef and they're 20 feet tall.
Wow.
Yeah.
It was like my boat was climbing up one side and going down the other.
That's
Like
a sheesh.
it was big.
And so if you consider those basic factors into it, then you won't face that ideally. Like
Ideally,
an ideal good day of sailing is that you don't have to like
And a proper
fight any of that
and a
stuff.
proper prep leaving in the morning is knowing you might, right?
Yeah.
And being ready for that.
So rivers and passes, very similar that way. Wind against current, you know, maybe it's worth you waiting another hour for the tide to turn the other way.
Another
And
day even
Yeah,
sometimes.
totally. Best advice I was ever given is that you never regret the trips you didn't take. So
Unless it was to somewhere fucking cool and you were just being a tosser, right?
I mean, there are like you go on YouTube right now, and there are certainly YouTube channels out there that like never go out.
Yeah.
And they've always got an excuse
They're
for it.
downwind sails only.
Yeah, and they seem happy.
Yeah.
You know, so
For a reason, because that's the
No-
easy, best way
no
to do
fault to them, right? So they're doing fine. But it is like you plan for all of the worst possible scenarios that you can possibly reach when you're heading out into it.
it. Yeah.
And then those are the conditions that you are allowed to go into safely, right? So for me, like I'm in my 30-foot fiberglass boat. I knew Gabriel the Georgia Strait could only throw so much at me, so that's what I headed out into, and I knew I was ready for all of that. But she certainly has thrown those things at me sometimes.
Yeah, like it's not to say don't do it, but
Right.
like know what you're getting into is a key part. Like
yeah,
those are very formative times as long as you've got all your safety gear
you
ready.
just gotta have a plan for it. That's
Yeah,
all.
that's actually a good point because then you can talk about like preparedness or like preventing.
You'll really see your weak points if you head out into something that's a bit bigger than you've ever experienced. And one
Well,
cool thing is that
No one's ever come in from a sail not having learned something.
Yeah.
Right. So
And
You're gonna.
I found it really cool that like every time I pushed my limits or gone to bigger seas, bigger winds, everything, it doesn't necessarily, I learn a bunch, but it doesn't necessarily feel horrifying. What it is that my personal bar gets raised and now I'm ready for everything underneath that. So again, like on my Pacific crossing, I did 70 knots in 25-foot seas for a hot second, not sustained. But when you experience that, now really anything under 25 knots and 25-foot seas is going to feel very manageable because I've done
Totally.
it before.
once you've done it once, you pop that cherry. You're ready to go.
And now I've got all these plans ready for when that comes too.
Do you want to talk? We got a couple of questions here that
Absolutely.
are really great. Rodney Allen asks what we could suggest for certifications required for a boating license. What's the first thing y'all get? And
So pleasure craft operator's permit. And actually, the nice thing about that is it is a secondary piece of ID.
It
is it really?
Yeah, I always use it when I buy cigarettes because
No way.
I want the cigarette store to know that I'm cool.
It's a written test. You do it online. I
Yep,
did
it
it.
costs like $50 or something.
It wasn't super short.
It took
It
a
took
long
me like
time,
yeah,
but
I think
it is
I spent
online.
like 2.5 hours doing it.
It's like a timed reading, and then you have to answer the questions. And unfortunately, if you do fail chapters, you have to restart.
Yeah.
But it is like the mandatory. In my opinion, the very least you can do if you're going to
It's-
operate
It's the
a
barest-
motor.
It's also the legal
like a-
bare minimum.
Yeah.
It is a low bar, but if you want to go beyond that, I have SVOP, which is kind of the next step on the chain, basically.
Which is considered a 5-ton ticket.
It is your minimum for commercial licensing.
Yeah.
So unless you're operating a fishing boat, which can be bigger than 5 tons, I think it's 15 or 12 or something like that. But it is like the very minimum, and that's all I've got.
My take is get your what's called internationally, so this is depending on what country you're in,
Yeah.
get your STCWs. In Canada, they are called the domestic vessel safety. So there's your
SVDBS.
there's that's basic safety. Get the domestic vessel safety DVS. That one is that one's incredible. That one will teach you a lot of basic radio safety things. It'll teach you a lot of fire suppression, which is really good.
Yep.
And it
Well,
will
what if
taught
we
you,
like fire?
then
You don't on a boat.
especially wooden boats. And then the coolest thing that I found about the domestic vessel safety, it was honestly, I've taken a bunch of courses. They're all boring and they're all academic and they're all really hard. But the domestic vessel safety was fun as hell and incredibly informative.
My instructor, so I did it like via like online classes. So you're in like a Skype session with your like my teacher for all my courses was fantastic. What was yours like?
Oh, it was a 5-day in person.
Yeah.
So it's fire suppression.
But they were very knowledgeable like sailors. It was great to get stories from them.
My guy was he was a BC Ferries employee who had people die on his watch. Like he had like really critical stuff for this. So what he taught was really cool. I think the most informative side of it was person rescue. It teaches you a lot about how hypothermia works and how hydrostatic pressure. So when you're underwater, you've got water pressure against your whole body. And if you're in shock, which you will be around here because of hypothermia, when you pull someone out of the water, their blood pressure is high. Their blood is being pressed everywhere by the water. And when you pull them out of the water upright suddenly, their blood pressure drops instantly and they're in shock. They will go into cardiac arrest.
Yeah.
So you learn basic things like make sure they're on their side and roll them slowly out of the water instead of just plucking them out of the water like you think you normally, like everyone would.
Is it because there's like a nitrogen?
No,
It's
it's not nitrogen. It's
blood
hypothermia.
pressure. Yeah, it's just the hydrostatic pressure of the water against your body is increased your blood pressure and suddenly.
It's more shock than anything.
Yeah.
It's putting someone in. It's all your regular first aid stuff. Like you're putting someone in the recovery position.
Yeah.
Post shock. It's all that kind of stuff, but accompanied with the fact that now they're soaking wet and will get freezing cold really quickly.
There's even key things like don't warm them up rapidly. Everyone would think
because it'll make them more in shock.
Yeah, and it'll send them into cardiac arrest again.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of really critical things you learn in that for basic life at sea. And then
I guess always the first step then would be if you are within radio reception, signal the Coast Guard or call 911. Because a paramedic or a trained medical professional is going to be able to give you advice. I guess too, like, so if you're traveling in a place where you can't get help, is to make sure that you're knowledgeable about the different situations that you could be in, because it could save you or your partner or somebody you care about's life.
Yeah, so I think domestic vessel safety for me was straight up the best ticket I ever got. I love my chart work. I love my collision regulations. All that stuff is really cool for not hitting other boats. But if you really want to learn something and have a good time, this is how to put on the Gumby suit.
That's always what I want.
Yeah.
Damn it.
It'll teach you how to put on a Gumby suit and jump in the water.
It's fun, yeah.
And form a canoe. You can literally form a canoe. You put other people's feet here, and you can all row together, and you can actually go really fast.
It's like an orgy, but nautical.
On water.
Yeah.
Yeah, and very, very safe.
That's hands down the best
Nothing
ticket I
gay
ever got.
about it.
Don't be gay. Don't be weird. It's all great. Rodney's asking about type in what SVDBS is. Small vessel domestic boat safety. Basic safety?
Yeah.
Small vessel domestic basic safety. That's Canadian.
Yeah.
So if you're not Canadian, then
the international is the Med A1 and Med A2, and that covers everything I was just talking about and everything that ticket covers as well.
I thought the Med one was different.
Med A1 and 2 are basically domestic vessel safety in Canada.
Okay, right.
And then yours is...
Because I had to take Med A3.
Which is, so the scale is inverse, so the 3 is the least important.
Right.
The 2 and the 1 trump.
But I had to take SVDBS and Med A3.
Yeah. Which makes sense for small vessels, like 5 tons and under.
Right. Okay.
Anything under 34.5 feet.
Right.
Other questions or next point?
Yeah, there was another question there.
No,
You're just gonna ignore it, asking for a perihelion update?
Oh, I texted a reply to that already.
You were like, no, not today.
No, we did. We can talk about it.
Yeah,
you guys want to talk about it?
Yeah, perihelion.
I didn't work on perihelion this week, so Simon, you did that.
I did.
I helped a tiny bit.
He did. He helped a tiny bit. We went in, and there's still chunks of the engine room that needed more clearing out. We've nailed down a sponsor for the engine coating, or the engine room
Yeah.
sound deadening, and one level of the fireproofing.
So watch Simon's episode about the engine room. That was
It's
like
true,
what,
yeah.
2 episodes ago?
Yeah.
Yeah,
If
so
not the
he-
most recent one is one before
Yeah.
that.
So you released a video today or was it yesterday?
Friday.
Friday. I've lost track of days.
Day
So
before yesterday.
yeah, so 2 videos ago, and that gives you like an update for the engine room. Everything else is kind of just weather pending. It's been raining
Yeah.
a lot, so we can't really do any deck work aside from like
Well,
mitigating the water.
We're all broke and we're soaked. So broke and soaked. So we're doing things that are free, which is demo.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we have run out of the Sapele beams that we were using to repair the beam ends.
Yeah.
So that's gonna be something that we need to
We need to
go
raise like
buy.
a grand basically in wood, and
We
then
just
we
need
also need to
to-
raise a grand in
we just-
electrical.
All need our jobs to do good right now.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, for like tattooing, this is
Yeah.
the particularly dead time of year. Like February is the like kind of the month
The
I should
deadest.
But-
should go to Mexico.
We're all kind
and
of
just not work at
working
all.
in like the what's it called, like leisure expenditure industries, right?
Yeah.
Tattoos, boating, it's all stuff that people don't
It's
spend money on.
non-essential,
Non-essential,
fancy
right.
kind of things.
So we're all feeling it. Hence why you've seen so many YouTube videos from us.
Yeah, we're working at it. We
Uh,
got time.
But
this is honestly keeping us from being depressed this winter, so we
It isn't-
really
it isn't
appreciate
So
you
I've
guys
just got a
being.
new glow lately. It's good. I love it.
It's just like a wintry.
it's a
sweat.
murderous intent.
I guess I'll move on to the next point.
Right.
Is basic provisioning. Again, talking about small trips, and I always really you've got, let's say it's 10 to 24 hours. The first hour or two, especially on a really early departure, are a little bit hectic. You've got a lot of things to check off your list and make sure everything's good. So I find that food is the most easy thing to really overlook. So if you can provision.
Thank God that you have me. Because my number one priority in life is to keep fucking eating. I'm gonna eat.
So I find immediately off the bat, grab a bunch of really basic, easy grab and go foods. So
He
that
likes cheap, high calorie, quick foods, but that you fed for long.
it keeps your brain clear and prevents the headaches while
But
you're.
also, when you're captaining your boat, you really if I wasn't there, you wouldn't have time to cook for yourself.
Which is why I
and
grab a bag of ketchup. instead of
Especially,
something
yeah,
else.
especially with doing like trip planning, you in advance
Yeah.
of the voyage. So
So a little bit of food prep. If you can maybe pre-cook your food the day before, so you can just like.
it's funny because we talked about this earlier, and we're like, yeah, totally, we're gonna prep a bunch of food for tomorrow. But we've been like busy setting this up, and we had to do a bunch of runs into town and cut firewood. So we
Prep,
didn't
yeah,
actually.
yeah.
So your intentions are excellent, but unless you actually do it, it's
Yeah.
useless.
So the reaction we had to not being able to make a bunch of food prep is that we grabbed a bunch of basic granola bars. And,
Yeah, what's your favorite food prep for?
Rice.
What's the thing you do?
I mean,
Rice
rice.
sandwiches.
Soup.
Rice takes time.
Sandwiches are so easy,
Shark-
and you can just shove 30 of them in the fridge.
Charcuterie. Slice up with some
Seriously,
salami.
a bunch of
and-
loose bits floating around. and
Absolutely.
You can on camber, you know.
Yeah.
Also, someone had a question
The
for
olives
me.
are rolling off the
Oh,
table.
what's the really
They
question?
asked me what my most favorite style of tattoos is. And
What
I'm
is
gonna give you like a middle child answer, like the
Oh.
most Swiss diplomatic answer. I actually really love a lot of styles of tattooing. If you look at the tattoos that I have a huge variety of tattoos. I don't think there's like one style that specifically is the best, but it's rather like the artistic expression of the person who's doing that style that makes it valuable. So like there's a lot of styles that can be expressed in like within the same amount of like, I don't know, beauty, I guess.
How would you
Yeah.
describe your style, though?
Autistic. ADHD? I don't know, dude. My whole plan with my bodysuit was to actually get a tattoo in every single style. So the only styles of tattoo that I don't have is what do you call it? What is it called? I can't believe I forgot right now. It's
The
like the
ones where they show-
bioorganic.
Yeah, bits of your body from the
Mhm.
inside out.
Oh yeah.
Where
I have tribal. I have traditional. Yeah, I don't know. There's a couple more styles. Oh, I don't think I have like a hyper realistic tattoo. Actually, no, that's a lie. I have
Your
Captain
back
Ron.
piece. Oh, you do. And
Captain Ron's
Captain
are
Ron
hyper realistic.
and
Oh,
I've never seen that
biomechanical
one.
is one style that I'd really
Somewhere
like to still
sensitive.
get.
Rod
Um,
Stewart as well.
Yeah, Rod Stewart. Yeah, so I like all tattoos.
I don't know. I try really hard because within tattooing, and I'm not going to call out anyone, but a lot of people complain about other people. And I think it's so ridiculous because we're all trying to accomplish the same thing. And I think if you're a good enough tattooer, there's no competition. Like, there's enough clients for everyone. And also, I just kind of hate when people shit on each other because, like, if you're shitting on someone else, someone's probably talking shit about you. And I just don't think that's, like, the kind of person that I am.
Yeah.
So I try, like, really hard to not be that way.
Yeah, and if someone's talking shit, then you know that they're
Also,
definitely.
we're all just people trying our best. So,
Yeah.
I mean,
Still the
remember
best,
that the
man.
next time you're about to complain about somebody.
Next time you're gonna leave a YouTube comment being like, well, actually.
So about provisioning.
I wouldn't do it like that.
Provisioning on small trips are key for me. Keep it really simple so that you can just keep yourself sustained and have a clear head during the early moments of it. The rest you'll work into a rhythm and you'll make some good food. And just
Brew
make
a
sure
nice pot of coffee and then put it in a thermos.
Absolutely. Thermoses are key.
Hell yeah.
Departing. So you're about to leave the docks. Everything's almost ready to go. How do you take care of that? What I do.
First, go to the bathroom.
Oh yeah.
Docking piss.
Docking pisses and
It's
takeoff pisses are bad.
That's so real too.
Go to the bathroom every time.
Yeah, you'll have to pee whether you want to or not.
Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely.
Always a thing.
I do my engine checks. I check my oil, my radiator fluid, transmission
Oh
oil.
wow, your oil, hey.
And the
Actually,
engine's oil, too.
It's our oil. I thought.
It's
like,
actually-
Oh my god!
It's fine.
It's actually Susie's oil.
Yeah.
It's
You should,
Susie's
in the
oil.
video-
Susie, who's a Susie?
What we should do, so we have to change the oil on Thunderchild. Maybe you should instruct me how to change oil and we can make a video of that. My girlfriend
Oh.
changes the oil on my boat. And
Yeah.
like,
Is that clickbait? You guys want that?
Yeah, yeah.
You want that? Tell us the truth.
if you
So-
can't do, teach, right?
So after you've got the vessel itself ready, make sure your decks are clear, ship shape, everything's where it's supposed to be ready. Take your sail covers off, blah 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 blah. If you're planning to sail, you've got everything in order. The boat is clean and clear. You don't have things precariously dangling high up that they can
Are you
fall
calling
down.
me out? Because we
Does
have a
it feel like it?
we have a colander hanging from the ceiling right now.
Oh,
It's
that's
like
fine.
fairly
Oh, down
secure.
below. Yeah, down below is a shit show. We'll just
And then
down. What's this? What's the cruiser's motto? It's like down below it all goes in the sink.
yeah, absolutely.
Right? It's just all gets dumped into the sink.
Your French press,
All the
everything it goes
cans.
into the sink.
Yeah.
That are gonna fall off tomorrow.
So then after the boat's ship shape and ready, then I check the conditions. Again, I don't care what the predictions have said online. I just stand outside. I look where the wind is. Sometimes I'll put a thing in the water to see what the currents are doing because I want to know if I'm being pushed backwards or forward or away from the dock or towards the dock by current.
And if
And
Poseidon
by wind.
comes up and gives you a little kiss on the cheek.
Yeah. And then
That's right.
once I know the conditions that I'm actually experiencing in the moment, that'll inform what my departure plan is. So I make a departure plan. I stand there, I think about it. When I worked on the Providence, the captain, he would do the same thing. He would do all of that, but he'd never talk about it. So he'd be like, okay, we're gonna, and I'd be like, stop. Can I tell you what I think we would do? Just to like warm into it. And I'd be like, I think this is happening, so I would do this. And like 9 times out of 10, he'd be like, that's exactly what I was gonna say.
And then the 10th time though, you get to learn something new, which is always
Yeah,
fun.
and so yeah, it'll be interesting because sometimes you're being pushed backwards, so or towards the dock. So there's
Yeah.
spring line options. I could do a whole video on how to be springing off.
You
and on
will
the docks.
eventually do a whole video
Yeah.
on it, definitely.
But there are books like the Annapolis Book of Seamanship covers a huge amount of spring line departures as well as arriving to docks. There's been times where we couldn't get the boat onto the docks because the wind was blowing us away from the docks so hard. We nosed into it because you can always motor straight into it. You can't motor sideways into it. So we motor straight into it. I dropped my crew member Alec off from the bowsprit. He landed on the docks. He brought a bow line with him. He ran up, tied the bow line off, and so now that we're being blown off the docks but we're tied to it, you go into reverse, and eventually she gets a little closer, and then you can toss the stern line and tie her back up. There's a lot of ways to really carefully think about what's happening. You go to approach a dock, it's not working, doesn't work. Do it again, but take some time to consider what's happening. And the key thing that I always say about docking and departing is it's not about doing it quickly, it's about doing it correct. So just take your time. There's no such thing. It could take you 4 hours. It could take you 20 minutes. It doesn't matter. As long as it's safe and it happens, then that was a good docking and
So
a departure.
exhausting to do that for 4 hours.
Sometimes
but you
it
know
happens.
what? You're right. Also,
Yeah.
someone in the comments asked if we had the Ashley Book of Knots, and
Oh,
fucking absolutely.
hell yeah, we do. ABK on lockdown.
We don't fuck with that. We don't fuck without it.
So yeah, sometimes your plans also go to shit, and you kind of thought you thought it all through, but something weird happens. Sometimes there's weird ebbs and currents in places. This is when you, again, like I said, take a moment, step back, consider what happened, and find a new angle to approach it from.
But unfortunately, there are certain scenarios coming into certain marinas where there is points of no return. And so you need to know, and I love doing, when I come out to a marina, especially if it's a tricky scenario, I'll do a loop, maybe even 2 loops. And in those loops, I will often gain another piece of information. And you'll see that, suddenly, there are a lot of boats that I've had where I'm towing a boat or I'm moving a boat and I'm hip tied to it or whatever, and the boat has the shape of the hull below the water means that there's almost nothing on the front of the boat, and that means it's really hard to get the boat to cross over on the wind.
And nobody's steering
It
the
doesn't-
helm either.
Well, and there's no way to steer it,
Yeah.
right? So to get the boat to actually tack, put the boat in reverse and slam it to the right? And so I pull to the left and twist the boat to the right. Or there's certain boats where you just can't turn in that direction, and knowing that before you get into a tight
I
scenario.
love this too, because sometimes when you're in a tight scenario, it just does go sideways on you, and you're going to hit boats. There's you will experience
happens
this
to
if you
everybody,
can.
yeah.
So what we do on the commercial ships is we always have one crew member with a roving fender, so they're just carrying a fender around, and they make sure they're at the tightest point on the boat, whatever's close to anything. And you make sure that if you're gonna, and sometimes you do, make impact with something, at least you've got a fender in between you and the problem, and you save yourself tens of thousands of dollars in a lawsuit. So there's always mitigate, think ahead. If you're about to approach something that's really tight and hairy, have a worst case scenario backup plan.
And not to brag, but we haven't hit anything
No,
for
yeah.
a while.
Yeah, it's
so.
been good.
It's been a hot minute anyway.
Touch wood.
Yeah.
So that's
Let's move
kind of
on.
departing. I think there's a really key thing with communication for crew members. If you have crew on board, or especially maybe even more heightened, you have a partner on board.
Oh my
It's
god, I
really-
got so much to say.
Yeah,
I got
good,
so
I'm
much
glad.
to say on this shit.
So Haley
So
and I,
scary.
the really basic quip I keep telling people is that Haley and I have a really simple method of sometimes we're like, hey, could you hand me my coffee? And she'll be like, get fucked, go stuff yourself.
Because
do it
it's
yourself.
funny as heck. It's so funny
But-
to mess around with your partner.
Yeah, that's
But
the
however, you need to be able to differentiate between when somebody's fooling around and when it's an urgent situation.
yeah.
So we've just been using the word, hey, can you do this urgently? And we know urgently or immediately
Drop
means
everything.
we're not making jokes. You have to it's a drop everything scenario. And sometimes we do say it in jest, but I don't think that is something we should get
Yeah,
used to.
it can be as simple as the boat's starting to heel over,
Yeah.
and sometimes I'm like, could you take the
Well,
coffee cups out of the
if we're
cockpit?
sailing, yeah.
She's like, you take the coffees out of the cockpit, whatever, for joking.
Yeah, bastard.
But then,
bet.
but then sometimes I can see wind is coming, and I'm like, we're gonna really heel over in
Yeah.
3 seconds.
Mhm.
Haley, can you get the coffees out of the cockpit urgently? And she'll just
Mhm.
grab them and go, and it's there's no hurt feelings, and I think that's a really beautiful way of
Also,
communicating.
It's a great way to communicate when you're already frustrated with someone, even if we're below decks. Because if I need you to move the fuck out of my way, I can just say urgently, and it has the same meaning
Yeah.
as if we were sailing.
8
And it
p.m.
means,
on a random Wednesday,
yeah,
you're like,
and I'm just
could you get your legs out of the way urgently?
Yeah,
we've
that's
been in a
exactly
small
it.
space for too
Oh
long.
my god.
Yeah. It's,
Alright, that's great.
and then we know it's not I'm not being mad at you. It's just I need you to do this for me urgently.
And I think the key I found working with a lot of crew members, I've worked under a lot of beautiful captains who have really,
Wow.
they're
How pretty were they?
so beautiful, where they have really clear, healthy communication. I've worked with some that just scream and yell, and I find that
Screaming and yelling always works.
that's
100% of the
absolutely.
time.
Well, it ruins your calm, it ruins your thought, your clear train of
It
thought.
really kills the vibes.
It does. And so what I find is that with my crew members, I often will praise, even if they've done a really poor clove hitch, but they've been trying and getting them better. I'll be like, "You're getting way better at the
Should
flow
actually
pitches."
wait and talk.
Yeah. So I'll like make sure to like really emphasize the things that they're doing right or getting better with. I'm a positive reinforcer, and I think that has worked phenomenally for me. So if you got people on your boat, don't yell at them. Reinforce the things that they've done right and let them know if they're improving slightly, and really hype them up, because if you have a hyped up crew and good vibes, everything's gonna go well for you. Everyone's gonna have a good time. But
But also, if you're rude to people, you can expect immunity, and like, who has the time for that?
Who's got the time for immunity?
ain't nobody got time for a mutiny.
Like you could just be stranded on Desert Island and like.
As far as comms go, working down here at the marina and also working for Cito, I've seen honestly like a lot of yachties tearing each other to pieces. And I will say they call them marriage savers,
Oh.
headset radios, and like
No,
if you're
they call them wife savers.
not in my circles anyway. Marriage savers, headsets that just allow clear, concise communication. They're not that expensive.
Shouting sucks.
It's a lot cheaper than a
Talking
divorce.
is great.
So, like, you know, if y'all are going to operate a fairly big vessel together and you're going to be running loud engines, like especially a trawler or a motor.
We've
boat
all
or something.
seen that couple that has come into a dock or an anchorage shouting at each other, and it's
Yeah.
so.
Dude, I pick them up with
awkward.
Cito all the time.
Yeah.
And it's like, there's been couples where they're so busy arguing that like, I'll tow them into,
They could have
The
resolved
dock,
it, but they just.
and their boat just hits the dock and then bumps off of it. And I'm like, could somebody tie it up? No, they're busy screaming at each
Oh,
other.
yeah.
Like, and you know, or I throw them a line to go tow them, and it like hits the guy in the head because he's too busy yelling at his wife.
Yeah.
And it's like, dude,
So
the hell?
partners are, I think, a heightened example, but everybody in general is really good.
Yeah.
Simon's good, clear communicator. Every time we do something, we always like do a little debrief. I think that's always a good thing. And you're like, yeah, good communication. That worked
Pre-trip
out
planning
great.
again to go back to our previous point.
The last thing on the crew communication or communication in general is radio checks. So the key with a radio, especially if it's like a 12 volt inboard powered one,
Got there.
you have to.
There you go.
Only two.
You guys have them. You
He's,
have
he's,
to.
he's got to run the show. I mean,
You
Sorry,
guys have to fire up your radios 15 minutes before
We
they're
drank
used.
beers in a 6-to-1 ratio yesterday. That was not the 6.
So fire up your radios 15 minutes before you use them, before you depart, and then do a radio check. Go on to not channel 16. Go on to, I think it's 6-8 alpha. Don't quote me on
It's
that.
actually very close.
And 8-6 alpha.
8-3 Alpha
8-3.
is the Coast Guard where you can check your radio and
Thank
you go,
you.
Victoria.
Coast Guard Radio, Victoria Coast Guard Radio, Victoria Coast Guard Radio. This is sailing vessel Dagon. Please.
Excuse
Who's
me?
forming radio
Sailing
check?
vessel Dagon?
Back in the day.
He's, he's,
I believe it's pronounced Tunderchoil.
So do your radio checks. Make sure your radio works. Make sure it works between your other crew.
Put
If you're
the
buddy
radio
boating, make sure
on.
that all their radios are working. And then you've got good communication. You're ready to go. The next point,
vandalizing her beer.
loser. That's her beer.
That's her beer.
Safety basics. You just make sure you've got your life jackets. Make like one for every person on the boat. Make sure your bilge pumps are running, batteries are charged. Don't be an idiot. Don't go out there and like.
And you're like, if you're operating a commercial vessel, you have to tell folks. You have to do drills with them, before, like a safety brief with them before you set off every single.
Oh yeah.
A lot of people don't. It's a messy world out there, but like, yeah, like even when I was doing water taxi or whatever, and like hauling folks around from island
Life
to island,
jackets are here.
these are folks that like I met like 20 seconds ago, and I gotta go sit down with them before we leave the dock and be like, hey, these are where the life jacket, this is where the fire extinguisher, this is where the, you know, blah blah
If
blah
you
blah.
see a fire, say this. If you do that, well, yeah.
Yeah.
If you fall in, make noise. We want to
Yeah.
know.
And like, and honestly, is like, if you all know anything about capitalism, that's the lowest bar,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's probably not even that safe.
I gotta say though, the commercial bar is 100 times better than what I see. Like.
Oh, on the
pleasure
private,
craft.
it's ridiculous. But
It's
like the commercial bar is
non-existent.
still low, is what I'm saying. Like there's, yeah, I can see how people get into trouble.
I found one of the best ways. So it's really critical to be doing drills with your crew members if you have multiple crew or by yourself. And commercially, it's required. Doing drills is great, but you can alternatively do thought drills where you just discuss the possibility, like, oh, if there was a fire in the engine room, what would you do right now? Just to make sure everyone's up to par on the code and the process, and then every once in a while you can act on it, pretend there's a fire, and do the physical actions for it. But
You can do fun ones once like there's like a when you dock a boat and you're done for the day. There's like a level of crack a beer, chat with your buddies, like all the weight is off your shoulders type of way that you feel. That I feel is a great time to do things like debriefs and safety stuff for the next trek, right?
What could we do
it's like
better?
talking about the next ones.
Where did I found what was really cool is doing one criticism and one compliment to every crew member, and it's a safe space at that point, so you can say you did this really well, but I don't like how you do this, and then it's like a big discussion.
It's just so hard to do it before you take off in the morning because timing is tight, and also people are anxious. Like I said, I'm having to rush off to the bathroom for a little bit.
So doing the drills ties into a point I'm going to make in a little bit. Really important, always do drills and log them.
Always be drilling. ABD.
So make sure, so the next part is where you're headed. Like if you've got a destination, don't just show up and hope to God they've got a spot for you. If you're going to a marina, call ahead. Call them on the phone or call them on the radio. They're usually on 6.6. And call them and say, hey, do you have space for a 40-foot sailboat? And then they'll say, no, not at all. You're going to have to go to the next spot. So, like, call ahead. Sometimes if you know what you're doing, call a week in advance and say, hey, I'd like to reserve a spot for a 40-foot sailboat on this day.
Can I tell a story about the safety drill?
Did you just notice Travels with Jordy left a comment?
Oh.
Our
I
friend, yeah.
How's it going, Peter?
Yeah, he just showed up. Hello, Peter.
Awesome.
He said he's in. Many of you may know him. We met him in False Creek, but I know Simon knows him pretty well.
We worked on Old Dog together. It was a wonderful time. We had like 3 nights of drinking together.
I was going to say, well, like you drank on all dog. I don't know if you worked
He's
on all
probably the best dressed man on YouTube.
Yeah, he is. Well, you got to be when you're rolling around on Monk. Can I tell a funny story about
Do it.
drills?
Oh, absolutely.
Drills.
Sorry to interrupt
Okay,
you.
so I got a great one that was told to me. So I'm going to throw him under the bus. Vern, the fella who sold me my boat, told me this great story
Great
of deciding one day that he hasn't done enough drills with his family
Okay.
and wanted to do a man overboard drill. And
Great,
so,
good call.
yeah, great call.
Always the best.
Didn't bother telling them.
Those are the best
He's just
drills.
motoring down
I love it.
down the straight and just goes, okay, bye, and just jumps off the back of the boat. I'm not kidding. Yeah,
Not a good call.
they motored for quite a while.
Throw a buoy, don't
Yeah,
jump off.
he just
Mhm.
jumped off the back of the boat.
Oh my god, that's
So-
ridiculous.
In my scuba dive training,
That's not a drill. That is a man overboard.
in my scuba dive training, we did emergency drills, but you were supposed to it was already talked about before.
Right.
But like part of, I think it was like
Consent
the
is key.
advanced diving. Part of like one of the prerequisites for the dive was like, at one point your dive buddy is gonna signal out of air or like an emergency situation, and you have to be able to assist them. But obviously, it's not gonna be an emergency. However, it could totally happen. But you have to be able to be prepared or like give them emergency air. It was like something like that. So like
As the-
always talk about it first.
As
So
the-
like,
It's important to talk about it first.
I had 2 different captains on the Providence where
what was the outcome of that?
Apparently
He
they
survived.
motored.
He died.
He's alive. But they did motor away for another 5 or 10 minutes before they realized that he was missing and had
oh
to
my god.
double back, and it took a long time for him to get picked up out of the ocean.
Terrifying.
He's got a little padding, so he survived.
Yeah.
But
What we do, so I had 2 different captains on the Providence, and one of them was like business oriented and just was like dock to dock, and I had another captain that was a lot more adventure oriented. So I'd approach both of them every trip. I'd be like, hey, how do you feel about like doing a drill, and if I just surprised you with a drill at some point? And one of them would say, no, don't you dare, and the other one would be like, yeah, I don't care. So with the captain who didn't care, I would just 3 days into the trip, I would just grab a buoy, throw it overboard, and call man overboard, point, and we'd go through the whole thing. And they were like, okay, cool, man overboard drill, let's go. And again, this ties into logging everything, and I'll talk about the importance of that later. But it's really, really good, especially on commercial vessels, to be doing drills regularly. and to be doing them safely.
Mm.
Don't huck yourself.
Don't
off
don't
the
jump
boat.
off the back of your boat.
Ugh.
Don't do
I
that.
feel like the no yeet rule should be
No
in place. Like if you yeet it, then it's your problem.
And anchorages, if you're
Yeah,
planning,
okay.
going to an anchorage, make sure you've either maybe been there if you can help it, or you know someone who can look at it and say, yeah, there's tons of space, or reach out on Facebook groups.
But
something.
realistically, if you're traveling abroad, that's not always going to happen.
No,
So,
and,
like,
and even when I was sea towing, like we have a turf, and eventually I got to know most of the marinas, but I'd still have to be on their website. A lot of them will post a terrible photo on their website of, like, because they'll call you up, you'll call them on the radio and be like, hey, I need a slipper, I need this spot or that spot, or you talk to a client, and the client goes, I need you to like get me into this slip, E16, and you look up on the website, and they might show which stick is E, but you might not know till you get there, and
Yeah.
so yeah, you try to plan as much ahead as you possibly can.
Yeah.
And I think so. If you can't confirm via Facebook, friends, other non-friends on social media groups, something, a call out somewhere that there is any available space in an anchorage, have a few planned, because you might get there and it might be totally booked up, totally full. Make sure you have a fallback.
A
Make
few
sure
and
for
time
sure.
to get there, and fuel to get there, and
All of it, yeah.
Right.
redundancies.
And then, yeah, do some
Actually-
scouting, do some research. And in fact, I was just researching anchoring in Degnan Bay a few
Yeah.
days ago. And I was reading an article, and I sent it to Simon. I was like, oh, because he used to anchor right there. And I saw in the photo of the anchorage was a photo of his boat.
yeah.
And then he pointed out that in the article was a guy that was on a boat trying to save another boat. He's like, that's me. I'm the guy in the boat saving the other boat. And I was
Yeah.
like, that's so cool. But like,
It's like a weird moment. Well, like, I remember that day exactly, and it's funny that like somebody would note that somebody
Yeah.
watched it and noted it.
sometimes it's a blog post that gives you all the information you need, right? Like there's information everywhere. Use
But, like,
all the resources.
That blog post was written by a person who anchored there 1 or 2 nights or whatever.
Yeah.
Like wasn't a local. So like
But they probably didn't check the weather, and it was blowing really hard.
yeah, they had a mixed result of the place, but they had a take from a person who's not a local, and that's the thing. Like you're looking for information online. It's not always the best, you know. Like you get a lot of information
Yeah.
from folks who might stop in 1 night, 2 nights, and yeah, it's kind of relevant to your experience, but it's not the in-depth information you're looking for.
Yeah. There's a lot of resources online. None of it's gospel.
No.
Yeah.
Be ready to
Well-
jump ship, jump that anchorage, and
Backup
go to another
plans,
place.
yeah.
The really nice
have
thing,
alternatives.
though, about like people with local knowledge that are like staples of the community is that they are really happy to share information.
Absolutely.
And they almost never put it online.
It's just a matter of like actually trying to find
Yeah,
them.
getting a hold of that info is really hard.
Well,
So that's why I say, like, if you're gonna deal with it, call up the marina. The local marina will know. Like, if someone called Silva Bay,
they would
we
tell
would know
you.
about it pretty
Yeah.
soon,
100%.
right? And they'd be like, "Oh, there's this guy, and he hit Thrasher Rock, and you know, like,
That you guys would be the first people
we
to
would
know.
be out there, right?
Yeah.
Like, solving it, right?
So, on the point of having backup options for where you might go, you might drop anchor. It's too rolly, too windy, whatever, and you're like, well, this is on the lee side of an island. Let's go to this other spot. On that point, make sure you have redundancies, other places to go.
I love a redundancy.
And my form of redundancy is profound. Simon and I just bought a lithium-ion powered ditch pump, because what if my electrical system dies? It's happened before. I can
Ironic,
still bilge pump.
Though that you guys lost the charger for it, so we were supposed to take it on our trip.
Misplaced.
Is it right
Misplaced
here?
it.
Is it right
Misplaced.
here? No, that's
Um,
those are headphones.
But
Damn it!
my form of redundancies goes a little further. I don't like going anywhere without a rib with an outboard on it, because even a motor, your main motor could die. My sails are my primary propulsion, my motor's my secondary. Maybe there's no wind and my motor dies. I still have an outboard on my tender to push me around. There's
And you've learned the lesson of what kind of tender can handle it.
yes, I sunk. Don't use a rigid unless you've got fenders on it.
Unsinkable
Or
three.
you got one of those super skookum rigids, but you know that it's still never going to be quite as good as an
And
inflatable.
if-
You
inflatable
may
is the move.
remember our wooden tender from
Yeah.
the Dagon episodes, Unsinkable 3. We were calling it Chicken Tendy for a while. I don't know why that was the name. It was a stupid name, but it just kind of stuck.
It's stuck for
It
sure.
stuck.
And then I guess from there,
see your families on?
Yeah, I did.
Oh, who's there?
Tom, Sue, and
Hey
various,
everybody,
yeah,
how's it going?
Lovely.
Also, Tom, shoot me your email address. I'll set you up with. 'Cause you
No, I'll set you up. It was
You're literally
my...
Uncle Tom, eh?
Yeah.
Wow.
He donated on our splash day, so
Yeah,
I would
also,
like to.
they were there for the entire splash day, so we had planned to splash at 11 a.m. and it was a hot summer's day.
In
So
and I
about
don't
there.
think we splashed until 4 p.m. and they hung around.
The entire.
Oh,
Every
Okay.
time
And I was like,
something embarrassing
You guys,
comes up.
you guys can
Like,
leave. It's totally fine. And they're
Uncle
like, no, like we're invested in this.
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
and it was
Your card and your donation.
It was the
very
most
sweet.
supportive of any of my family members, and I do really appreciate it. You
I
guys
could
are
just
amazing.
imagine the smell at Steveston on a hot summer
Oh
day.
god, it's awful.
Spectacular.
Also, my cousin is a young man with his whole life ahead of him. He could be literally doing anything else.
Yeah.
Also, I want to say I did see, I believe it was a cutting board he made in carpentry or woodworking class. It was amazing. So
Don't
maybe-
embarrass him now.
No, it's a good job.
maybe he wants to get into carpentry on boats. I think he
Absolutely.
might have a skill. at
You
that,
have so much of a brighter future ahead if you don't do it.
Don't do it.
Don't do
So then the next point is first aid. I think that should have been our first point for tickets to get. Get your
Mhm.
marine first aid.
Mhm.
Regular first aid is good enough for small vessel SVOP or
Yeah, marine is just they tick a box. It's no different of a course.
it's not really any different. No.
And yeah, just knowing how to do CPR, do any of those things. Have your first aid sorted out on your boat. Have a few antibiotics
Yeah.
on standby.
Literally,
So I
we've got
have-
one. This workshop, that workshop, this boat, that
Yeah.
boat. Every boat has
We have
it.
like 3 on our boat. Haley's sister
have-
hooked us up.
Shut the front door. I have level 1 first aid, and we received an anonymous, generous donation of medical supplies from someone who wished to remain anonymous. But it was like, yeah, so it set us up. Maybe we'll go through it one day, and like people can help us figure out what we actually need to sort. I personally think that having a cold and flu medical kit is important, separate from like the emergency medical kit. I think it should be in sections so that we can grab like 3 or 4 different kits depending on like it should be like so there's less things
Severity.
to grab, but like we know exactly what section.
I like the folding.
I love a clear tote.
I like the
So-
folding metallic with foam lining on them, the splits. Those are critical. You know, if you have someone with a major flesh wound or a broken limb or both, you really do need
If
to be able
you-
to take care of that. They will die. I have heard mayday calls where people are dying 10 minutes from where I am. They literally died on the mayday call.
Striking an artery is like a serious thing.
It happens.
If you flesh wound, I will catch you. I'll be waiting
and we
time after time.
honestly, I would
Gauze and super glue, baby. Those are the 2 things I go through the most on mine.
having an AED on board is also a good idea because honestly, people have heart attacks out at sea all the time. I can
So-
say for a fact all the time. And
An AED is an optimal thing to have if you have electricity.
no, they're
Battery
self-charged.
pack, yeah.
Okay.
And so I think that's a critical thing to have. The reason we
All
weren't
kinds of fun stuff you can put in
we
there. You
weren't
get
the-
really nerdy about it.
Honestly, think like the most universal item to have in your boat medical kit is actually a pocket mask to help
Oh.
provide CPR.
yeah, that's a great call.
Sure.
Also, it's something you should carry on you if you're scuba diving.
A friend of mine performed CPR for like 9 hours straight on somebody, and you have to do it until you get to shore, until first
Yeah,
responders are there.
and that's the thing with
Like-
boats. It's you're
Yeah.
hours from help
And,
often.
and if you stop, you're culpable. Like, you know your stuff. Take care of the people on
An
your boat.
interesting point is actually that you can't perform CPR if you're in water rescuing someone. You have to provide emergency breaths, and I can't remember exactly what the time period is, but it might be like 30 to 60 seconds in between. But you have to be able to like so. For example, say you're scuba diving and you're near the surface, but somebody becomes unconscious, and you need to like help them breathe. So they're carrying a lot of scuba gear, and also the same for you, which is inhibiting your speed in the water, so it's causing a lot of drag. But you need to get them back to the boat quickly as possible while also helping them breathe. So you need to be able to provide rescue breaths
While not
while
dying.
also while stripping gear off them.
Mm.
So that's what I did in my rescue certification for scuba diving, and it was the single hardest thing I've ever done in my life.
If people freak out about the whole
So
mask
you
off
have
thing
to, like,
underwater, it's like it gets so much harder.
time the rescue breaths
and then also in the gap between the rescue rests, strip off gear,
Mhm.
which can be extremely difficult if you're not familiar with your dive partner's gear. So that is another
Wow.
reason. So if you're diving with someone, make sure you familiarize yourself with how not only your gear works and show them, but vice versa.
That applies to sailing 100%.
Mhm.
Yeah, you gotta
know-
find
know
where the
your rig.
ejector seats are.
Yeah, because if something goes wrong, you need to
Yeah.
help your dive buddy, and pretty much 100% of the time, if they survive that encounter, they're gonna be very pissed off if you cut their shit off.
Oh yeah.
So, and a lot of things have quick releases, but unless you know how that quick release works and you're strong enough to do it, because a lot of, especially BCDs, have very hard press buttons, and like as not a strong person, that was like what I struggled with. It
Really?
actually
Yeah.
almost fucking broke me. I had to strip a BCD off my dive partner, who's another small woman, but her, or actually I think it was either mine or her BCD. It was such a, like, it was a button. The quick release was so hard to press that I just couldn't physically do it,
Wow.
and it almost made me fail. And I think we switched BCDs, and then I was able to take hers off. But
I
like,
want to test. I've got like a quick release on my BCD
Mhm.
that you pull a cord and it drops all the weights.
that's the weights? Well, you flip it
From-
open.
Well, for mine it's a Ranger, so it's got
Oh,
pockets down the sides,
Mm.
and you rip a cord and it drops all the weights out of all the
Yeah.
pockets. The bottoms of the pockets open out. I've never used it.
Actually, we should.
We should try it
I
out.
would really love, so since me and Simon are divers, he's offered last year to teach me how to do some like the zinc changing and like the diving around here.
Mhm.
I think that's something I would really enjoy.
We're gonna get an underwater camera so we can include it in this channel, but it's
Like if the two of us,
you know,
were-
just hit us up on buy me a coffee because
Absolutely.
this underwater cameras ain't cheap.
Again, anyone who supports us,
We've
on
got
do-
gear.
I know
You
I
need
do
a
need to buy
wetsuit
a wetsuit,
or
and like I'm a
eventually a
6
dry suit.
tall, so and those I think are about $600 for a nice one,
Yeah.
something that'll last a while.
Mine-
Again, I'd
I-
like to remind everybody, anyone watching, if you support us on Buy Me a Coffee right now or donate right now, I will
Take
provide.
his shirt off.
I will give you guys a.
He'll keep his shirt on. You have to pay extra for that.
I'll give you
Woo.
guys a membership to the Buy Us a Coffee, which is very similar to Patreon, mirrors it. So feel free to hit that up if you would like.
Not
We
desperate.
definitely appreciate it.
The next point is logbooks, and there's a really important point to make about
Honey,
logbooks.
Did you take the beer that
No,
was
it's ours.
allegedly for me?
It's for you. So with
It
logbooks,
says your name right on it.
it's real.
Excuse me?
Yeah, you're welcome.
Lucier. Lucier.
Simon, that's actually so rude. I don't think I can handle it right now.
Perfect.
Logbook importance is critical. So if you're doing a basic trip, try and log your departure times, your engine checks, pre-departure checks, all of that stuff. Log it down. And if you do a radio check, log that in. And if you do a drill of any kind, even if it's a thought experiment or a physical drill,
Well, like an emotional manipulation.
but make sure you log it in, write it down, because if you end up in trouble at any point with the Coast Guard, if you need help and they're like, and they just ask to look through your stuff and you're like, I don't have a logbook, they're gonna be like, you're a sloppy bitch and
So-
you are at
Oh,
risk.
they will
Actually-
drag you through it.
So
Yeah.
what Barry is saying, if you're gonna talk to the cops, make sure you have your story straight
Yes,
and
Right.
written down,
100%.
so that it doesn't change
Exactly.
and they don't look like a guilty party.
But if you're literally out there all the time and you end up calling the Coast Guard, which you probably will, and there's no shame in it. When you need help, you need help. But if they ask to see your logbook, and commercially this matters massively, so always log everything commercially.
Mhm.
Personally, log it also. But if you don't have this stuff in place, and they're like, they look through your logbook, and like, you know, it's obvious why the guy died when he fell off your boat. You've never done a man overboard
You're a
drill.
horrible sloppy ass person.
Yeah, exactly. But or if you're like, here's my logs all the way up until when you needed to tow us into safety in our emergency, and they're like, cool, you're a fastidious person. That's great. They will.
They love their paperwork. They
but
really
if
do.
you have none of that on hand
Yeah.
and they ask for it, you're paying $16,000 an hour for the helicopter.
Mm.
You're on the hook. It's a problem.
Also,
Yeah.
Don't be a sloppy bitch. Log everything and do drills. That's the whole point
Simon,
of that.
you did talk about working for CETO earlier, but what does a CETO membership actually cost, and like what benefits does it have to The
Is
average
this a
boater.
Ceto commercial?
No,
Well,
but
No,
like,
Boat US
well,
as well.
so we're
Boat
talking
Show
about
US.
safety. So
But
like
planning
in an
ahead, like,
in an emergency situation, like what is it going to cost you if you need help?
so what a lot of services similar to Ceto, which is out here in the Pacific Northwest in Canada, they offer the ability to call in, I think it's twice a year, and get a free tow to the nearest
The
port of
nearest,
convenience. So a port of convenience means it's
And
a
it's regional, of course.
so it's like if I well, the interesting thing is if I broke down just outside of Gabriola, they'd actually tow me to Nanaimo, not Gabriola, because there's
Yeah.
no longer a shipyard
Yeah.
here. So anyway, that's the bit. So it's worthwhile for, I would recommend it to most folks, especially if you're hopping into a vessel you don't know super well. A Ceto membership is very useful. Wherever your local one is, just Google it ahead of time. It's the kind of thing, just like looking at your charts the day before. It's the kind of thing you should probably consider. If you don't trust your engine super well, it's lovely to have backups. It's a great backup.
If you don't have a friend named
Remem-
Simon, it's probably worth it to
And
get
remember-
a Ceto membership.
The Coast Guard saves people, not boats.
If you watch like the first 7 episodes of season 2 of Sailor Berry, it's literally Simon towing us everywhere we go. So like, you know, sometimes you just can't do what you
We're
gotta
the
do.
Lynn and Larry to the Simon.
There's a few
I've
friends.
heard it-
I have a few friends here who just burn
I've
their
heard
luck
this
on this one.
expression of you're not a real sailor unless you've towed Lynn and Larry into a port.
Wow.
Because there's literally stories everywhere I go. I've met so many people that are like, yeah, I used to hear Lynn and Larry calling on the radio, engineless sailors. They've written books about this stuff all the time, and they're like, yeah, is anyone in this harbor? Can we get a tow in?
I would just love to think that Lynn and Larry are so beloved and kind and joyful that like people just want to help them out. It's like how the first couple times once we launched Dagon, you were just like, oh, that's so cool that you finally launched. You felt obligated to help us, just so like we didn't stress ourselves out after a hard time. Yeah,
He just wanted to meet us.
yeah. It's just like I feel like it's.
Do
a
you know how many
milestone.
times I showed up and they were like, we had 3 beers, and we drank them all.
That's actually. Let the record
It was
show.
one
that's not
time, but I was
That's
very
100%
upset. I was
true.
very upset.
The
when it
one
happened.
time that you rescued us, we had like one beer that we shared, I think, because that's
So-
illegal.
So I
Right?
have, it is. So I
It
have,
is super legal, and we never do that.
at this point, I have a
So-
question for both of you guys, and I think it is, what
Truth or
would you, and I'll start with Simon,
Oh,
what
God.
would you take from your diving experiences, safety-wise and pre-planning-wise, that you can apply to sailing and trip planning?
So I come from a diving. I did some cowboy ass shit, both in my sailing and my diving,
Which
because
I don't think there's room for cowboy shit at sea. I actually hate that desperately.
so but truthfully, you know, you look at the price of diving classes, you look at the price of sailing classes, and it's pricey, and
It's prohibitive.
it's prohibitive, and there's a lot of, you know, the story I tell folks all the time is it was $585 for a sailing weekend long course, and it was $500 for a boat, so I bought the boat instead. But yeah, so I would say despite my cowboy nature, I have only ever taken as many risks as I was ready to take. So I started sailing just in my own bay. I knew that I could swim to shore anywhere I was, no matter how bad it got in that bay, I could handle it. And I did it like, I think I sailed across that bay. I did 24 days right around sunset in light conditions, just sailing back and forth and tacking between the mooring balls. That's all I was doing for like 24 times.
Amazing.
And then I sailed from Gabriola to De Courcy, which is 1 nautical mile, 2 maybe, not even 2.
Goes through Gabriela Pass, though.
But there's a passage, there's an interesting entrance to a bay, there's stern tying, and
You're stepping it up.
you're stepping it up. But you know, so I incrementally built it up, and I only ever took as many risks as I was ready to deal with in the moment and the time. But it still caught me with my pants down, because I left Deccan Bay for my first cross the strait sailing and got a full knockdown as soon as I got out from behind the islands. Sails went down, scooped the water, sprung back up, shot the water in my face. I was doing donuts, and I was Googling on my phone how to reef sail. Like there's shit that I just never had learned, and I was drifting off onto a reef, and finally got control of my boat and was able. I had a great day by the end of it, but it was a hell of a day, and there is a non-zero chance I died that day, right?
This actually brings me to a point of something that I wish I had made earlier. Now that
Right.
I'm into the Q&A section for these guys, I wish I had made the point of when you're studying the conditions, when you're studying the weather for the day, if you see big winds, reef before you leave.
Yeah.
Pre-reef, maybe you've over-reefed. It's easy to shake a reef out. It's really hard to put a reef in.
It
Reef
is,
before you
especially
leave.
if your foresail is a hank-on and you have to run, and there's no lifelines, there's no nothing to keep you on the boat.
Horrifying.
It's only a Cal 20, wasn't much of a boat. I could pretty much reach the forestay and the mast at the same time.
That means you're even more like those.
But
for me,
yeah,
the waves
flinging
are
around.
nothing, but like
yeah.
for him,
I was
he
on a
gets-
surfboard. Yeah, it was something.
So reef before you leave. Do some pre-planning. That's a big part of the pre-planning. Is if you see the conditions are 25 knots, put a reef in your main just in case you need it.
I've done like 200 dives now at this point, and they've all been those little sails across the bay. Like I've literally done, I think, 3 dives that were not in Silva Bay or Degnan Bay.
Yeah.
I've gone to a maximum of, I did in my diving course was the deepest I ever went,
Yeah.
which was 75 feet.
75.
That's it.
So, contrary to Simon's experience, I think I have like absolutely the most, for this analogy, like the most opposite experience. I've actually never dove exclusively by myself. All of my dives were with a professional dive company. Like I said before, I am rescue certified. Primarily, I do have dives that are done with a dry suit in cold water. Mostly during the winter time, including like December when it's been snowing out, like 2 years in a row. My only warm water experience is actually in Burma, when I chartered a dive boat for a week in the, I know I'm going to pronounce this wrong, Mergui Archipelagos. Yeah.
Very, very
So-
jealous.
Burma is also known as Myanmar.
Yeah, so that being said, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah,
Like diving.
what lessons have you learned from diving, safety, and taking care of yourself that you think you could apply, that do apply
I
to
think
safety of sailing?
That has made me a very conservative diver, but I don't necessarily think that like it is always that intense. Like the deepest I've been is 120 feet on like a 26% oxygen blend. That being said, I did not really enjoy it. I'm not a deep diver. I think that I would actually really enjoy diving out here on a more casual basis and like cleaning boats and changing zincs. Because you have almost 5 times the amount of dives that I have.
They're all the same. That's
Yeah,
how I've
see.
dived the same thing over and over, and it builds complacency.
But how do those the fastidiousness, the care and the pre-planning,
So I
what does
think
that apply for sailing?
with cold water diving, it really attracts a certain kind of person. It is a person who is very like technical, because with a dry suit there is more pre-trip planning involved, and there's also, I don't know, with cold water diving, it's just not something most people do alone out here, because it is more fun with a friend, but there's a lot more
Same
things
could be
that
said
can
of
go
sailing.
wrong, and dry
Well,
suits
that's-
are a lot more expensive, so
Yeah.
it also attracts a more wealthy person, someone who is successful at their job. I know I did a trip on the Sunshine Coast in Egmont, and I went diving. It was me, the dive instructor who was a man my age that worked for the company, and then it was 3 engineers that were like over 45,
Yeah.
and they were all engineers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good
So
money.
yeah, like
It's
I
not
was the odd
cheap.
person out for sure.
But it's not like a snooty industry either. Like I did all my diving courses with a diving company that's really close nearby in Nanaimo, and they were salt of the earth folks, and they were pretty chill, and it wasn't like, I wouldn't say it's too snooty. It's a great thing. I would highly suggest doing the courses.
Yeah.
I waited too long to do my courses, honestly. Getting 100 dives in before I took my courses was a mistake,
Yeah.
because it took me
It teaches
longer.
you bad habits.
It
So-
took me longer to establish the better habits.
I don't know if anyone else has experienced the same thing, but have you ever seen somebody choking, and they're just like they're sitting there, they're like, no, I'm fine, I'm fine. And they try and drink some water, and it doesn't go down, and they're like, I'm fine, I'm fine. Never be that person. Honest to God, if you've fallen off a boat, if you're choking, if you're drowning
Never
while
be the
you're
person
diving,
who's choking.
no, you will be someday.
Right.
Especially when you're sailing and diving, it will happen to you. There is no shame in going,
Well,
pointing to your throat,
genuinely,
being like, I'm drowning, I'm choking, I need help, or calling the Coast Guard and saying, I need help right now. There's no shame in doing that. So if you're ever at a point,
this isn't an ego thing for me. Though.
Pardon me, Simon.
I
Did
didn't-
you write Big Roy on your?
Big boy.
Oh, okay,
Big boy. I'm big boy.
Big. I thought it said Big Roy, and I was like, is that your new quantum
Yeah,
this
personality?
guy ain't no Roy.
I am a Roy. It's not a honestly. Genuinely, I feel like the sailing courses, the diving courses. In my ideal society, you don't pay anything to get into them because that was the big thing that kept me out of them, and that made me do cowboy shit.
Yeah,
Yeah.
It was
that's the
dangerous.
thing.
Had it been free, I would have done it.
It was
Right.
expensive.
It was
but,
expensive,
I
and
was
that
a single.
sucks.
I was a
right?
single lady who was making good money at tattooing at the time, and it was like my biggest priority
I
to.
was a single boy and I was broke
to
as
do
shit.
that,
So I just
I put
Alright.
like, yeah.
the diving gear swallowed up all the money. So how are you gonna go?
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing.
That's the nice thing is the courses supply
So-
the gear,
You didn't pay for the courses,
right?
but you have the dive gear, and I paid for the courses, and I don't actually have the gear
Well, I
because I
bought
was
the
renting
gear
it.
and bought the courses, but the nice thing around here is you can make a couple bucks doing some diving work.
Yeah.
So,
To be
um,
fair, you did most of your diving work cowboy style.
well, I got a $280 Amazon
Mhm.
wetsuit and then a
What's the thing though? Like you've
Used
obviously
dive
had like a
compressor.
lot of very successful dives, so like I don't
Mhm.
think there's like
It's still here.
yeah. I mean, if you think about it, in like a lot of countries
it's
where
a logical thing.
diving is
yeah.
done for like food sustainability
Yeah.
or like it's a regular thing. It's warm water diving too is a lot more relaxed than the cold water diving that we do in Vancouver.
So I did like a maximum of 30 feet. And there was a few moments where I pushed it to 40 and it made me very nervous because at 30, that's the distance you can free dive
Yeah.
to. Really,
So
a
that- I
normal
guess that's,
person
like,
can free dive
The
to.
key difference is that
Right.
the majority of the dives that I did were 60 to 80 feet
Right.
with a maximum of 120 feet.
You're not free diving
So-
those distances unless you're a pro free diver,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
So I was always diving with the mentality of a swimmer. So I was
Mhm.
thinking, if shit went sideways and I had to jump up and then there was something in the way and I had to maneuver around it, like that's the distance I wanted to be from.
But a good example of that is if you look at your diving charts and you understand that the depth that you're diving at does not require you to do a safety stop,
No.
you really don't have a lot of risk involved.
The problem with the diving charts though is it'll also show you is that some of the time you spend underwater. When you have a surface
Mhm.
air supply like I did, I would spend 4 hours underwater.
Yeah. So
You
1
know?
in 10,000 dives can still result in decompression
Yeah.
illness. And it's happened to a lot of people who are professional divers and
Mhm.
who have made redundancies. So like it can still happen.
You fuck around, you find out.
Yeah.
I fucked around, luckily I didn't find out. Might
Mhm.
still find out one day, but I'm gonna try not to fuck around so much.
So in diving or sailing, because I was thinking sailing only, but this is actually like opened up a big
Yeah.
can of worms. For both of you, what is? And I'll start with Haley this time. What's the worst example you've experienced?
The most afraid I've ever been. I think I went on recreational with like a professional dive company that I was diving with did like Thursday night dives, and they were excellent. I did most of my training with them. So I was on this night dive with I think it was 3 other people. One of them, which was my dive buddy. We were diving in White Cliff Park in Vancouver, which is like a very excellent dive site. There's a lot of wonderful things to see. But I guess I got distracted at a reef by whatever, and when I looked up, my dive buddy and the group I was diving with was gone, and it was dark out, so I had my torch, and obviously I started to look around for my dive partners. Once I realized my group was gone, I had looked at my dive computer and my oxygen supply, and I realized that I had like very nearly reached my turning pressure, which means that it's like the halfway point
where you need to. So it's the rule of thirds. So 1/3 to get there, 1/3 to get back, 1/3 redundancy. So I had reached my turning point, which was like the 2/3, or like I had used my all the way air to get there, whatever that is.
Yeah.
And my dive buddies weren't there. Fortunately for me, there was another group diving with the same dive company, and a very lovely man noticed that I was looking around, saw from like a little bit of far away. He could sense. He was a very experienced diver, and he noticed that I was like exhibiting the signs of panic, and I fully think that I was starting to panic. And something that you rarely do when you're diving is touch another person, because there is entanglement hazards and just like something that is not necessary. But what he did was he just grabbed my arm, and it was enough to like get me out of like that rapid panicked thought process. And at the time, I did have enough oxygen to fully get back in time. There was not an emergency situation, but it was like the first time my brain told me that like I was in a dangerous situation. Fortunately, that person noticed that I was exhibiting the signs of panic, so he called a dive. So I don't know what dive plan he had, but he noticed that I was in a situation that
He's
could
like-
become an emergency.
He's like, I'm your guy now.
Yeah.
He's
And
with you.
he called the dive,
Yeah.
and it was like obviously I could have surfaced, and like realistically, if you are in a situation where you separate from your dive partner, I think it's like what you spend a couple minutes looking for them safely,
Yeah.
and then
I don't remember
you
what
end the
time
dive
is,
and you
but-
surface. You do
Yeah.
your surface interval, and then you go up and you just wait as long as it's safe. But fortunately, he was able to take us back the way we came underwater, and then we ended the dive in a safe way so that it was like gradual and slow paced. And I can't remember what the person's name was, but it was
Sucks.
genuinely one
Yeah.
of like the nicest things that had
That's
ever
so
happened
nice,
to me.
yeah.
I like the rule of thirds idea. It's exactly the opposite of Captain Ron.
And
where-
that is a sign, and I think they're
Yeah.
a dive instructor now, and like
oh
probably
great.
the best person to become a dive instructor.
So
Like,
chill. It's all about being relaxed.
I
Like a
like-
good captain.
Yeah, so the rule of thirds, I like that 1/3 to get there, 1/3 to get back, and 1/3 for redundancy. Whereas our idol, our hero, our Lord and Savior, Captain Ron, he knows he's
We don't
at-
want to be Captain
He
Ron.
knows he's at the island because he's run out of gas and he knew he had enough gas to get to the island. That's not how we operate. We don't operate
No.
like Captain
Yeah.
No,
Ron.
it's not what we
It's
want.
such a
There was a comment
oh yeah.
about putting a dive compressor on your boat. Hold on, I'm just going to check my phone here for who it was. Oh, by the way, Pale Fox called you out.
Oh, what is-
it just says, I've got a lot of tickets. Barry. That's your quote of the
But
evening.
like we don't know exactly.
We don't know what
tickets
they are, but he's got a lot of tickets. Don't worry about it.
I'm very
I have a
popular.
book for my tickets.
Yeah, there you go.
We have a book, but we don't know where it is. No, I know.
Alex
it's not.
Michael is asking, first asked about towing a tow a ghost, which is just a floating line behind your boat.
Oh, that's a
Which
prop
if-
hazard, isn't it?
Well, no, if you're going single-handedly, I've done this many times before, where I would just tow a floating line behind me,
Yeah.
and it was,
Yeah.
you know, I was on a small boat thinking I might fall over. If I at all felt that I was in the risk of that, yeah, that's one of the first things I'd set up. Is it's one of those things you think ahead.
Make sure it's a buoyant line.
A buoyant line.
Don't let it catch in your
No.
prop.
But also, this is a dive compressor. There's a video coming up. I've done a video already about a small portable tank that you can run and fill off of this. We've done those tests. It worked out great. We put a zinc on your boat.
Yeah.
But I just recently have been filling large full-size tanks with
Oh
this.
really?
It has worked. I won't say it's perfect, but it's worked.
That's good.
It has a tendency to nearly overheat, so colder environments are better. Air circulation is good. It's loud as hell, but it works, and it's very affordable. This compressor is under $500.
That's great.
So getting a dive compressor under $500 is insane.
That's wild.
Also,
Also, that's
filtration,
Too.
I
Also
don't-
runs on 12 volt.
it runs on 12 volt or 110 or 220. It's got a shitty filter on it, which I don't love, and I need some more cabling to put a bigger filter and some water catchment and stuff. So that's
Sweet.
definitely something in the future we'll set up. But that's it.
Um,
Put this down.
so, common examples of people at sea in distress that you can think of as someone who has been the guy to rescue them.
Well,
What are the?
we're almost at an hour and a half now, so I'm going to keep it short. But it comes to me in waves and in types, archetypes that I would see.
Yeah.
So it's early in the season, we see the same folks calling us up when I was working for the tow company, and it would be clogged fuel filters, 9 out of 10 times.
Yeah.
Back to back to back. And
Check
then,
your fuel filter before you depart.
you know, midsummer, in the middle of summer, is when like a lot of folks who maybe aren't, they're on a boat that's already been out a few times, but this is their first time doing whatever it is.
Yep.
Those folks put non-floating lines on their dinghies. They tow their dinghies with sinking
A
lines.
buoyant painter all the time.
You want a buoyant, brightly colored painter for your dinghy. So that was a popular one. And
Oh, so exactly what we don't have.
No,
Yeah.
we have.
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
you want a
The
nice
painter-
bright yellow.
Actually, I did notice that our painter on Toby's tender actually is a
Is
little
what?
bit fouled.
I don't love it. No, it's
Yeah.
bad.
It's
So
not
we need to
buoyant.
replace
Right?
It's
it.
bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then there were the schlups with the heat fused motors, and
Yeah.
they forgot to open their seacocks, so that's always a big one. Don't forget to do that.
So the best ways to safeguard yourself: check your fuel, check your filters before you leave. Make sure you have checked on your oil. Make sure there's no water in it. Make sure you've got.
Particularly make sure that there's no oil in your water. It's been a problem for us in the past.
Actually, an episode that I was talking about making earlier was the problems that we've encountered underway.
Yeah, it'd be nice to make an episode about that.
Not that
Recap.
I'm like a professional at
Oh,
this.
we're
but
not immune to failures.
pretty much every single time that we've taken a boat, including
Thunderchild.
the
Oh,
boat we did
Mysterium?
Mysterion, we've encountered different problems, and actually Barry has been.
Yeah.
You've
It's-
solved every single one of them, and including some terrifying electrical problems with Mysterion.
Yeah.
Where what was that
It
cable?
was
number?
the main ground on a 24-volt system, so a very
Ooh.
solid electrical
We
system.
Ooh,
delivered.
Sparky.
It's wrapped around the prop shaft.
Oh
So
my
by,
God.
Mysterion.
by a shipwright who shall remain unnamed.
So Mysterion is a motor yacht from the 1940s.
Yep.
Very classic.
No,
You'll see.
1920s.
Oh, 19.
That's a nice
Damn.
big
Yeah.
giant
And she's
prop shaft, I can
in
just
Heritage
imagine.
Harbor right now. That's where she always
I think
is.
it's episode 5 or 6 where we deliver it.
Yeah. Well, I
Oh,
don't
that's
know
the
if we
one with the
included.
crazy.
The huge shipping lever.
So
Yeah.
That thing was
classy.
so wild.
George,
love that
so
boat.
a lovely
This is-
man named
whenever I-
George. owns
Whenever I
it.
recommend Barry as a boat mover, that's always what I think of, is that giant shit.
Dude, I
Like,
love that thing.
that shit taking off the dock, that shit makes me so nervous.
Oh, it's the
So,
best takeoff ever. I
When
love
we
that boat.
when we took her from Heritage Harbor
It's like a
to
clutch.
Steveston, we had no problems. She was working excellent. But when we delivered her from Trites to Steveston,
I heard
um,
some.
so we managed
sounds,
to dock her in the transient docks in Steveston, like downtown Steveston.
And then I shut the motor off.
Yeah, and then we went and got lunch because it was early, and then we went back to the boat, started her up, and she
No,
was
there's no starting it. I was
Nothing,
like, what
yeah.
the heck?
She's been running on alternator alone for.
100%.
she had been running perfectly that day. So Barry had the mind to take out the boards and look in the engine room, and that is like a vast engine room, which we actually had no part in restoring.
I had crawled into it, and then
Yeah.
as I reached over the prop shaft, there was a huge electrical arc because there was raw electrical sheared across the prop shaft. 24 volts. I of like
Yeah.
big
It'll-
4 big
24
diesel
will arc that
batteries.
much further, right?
Probably the most unexpected worst thing that could happen.
Yeah.
So it was laying
It was just-
across the prop shaft, and when the prop shaft was running, it sheared it, so it was just hanging loose in the engine bay.
a 24 volt cable,
And, like,
full powered.
Keep
touching
in mind,
metal.
we are
Yeah.
not familiar with that engine bay. We don't know how the cords operate.
That's
So
the
it's-
scariest thing.
But
is
obviously, like,
yeah.
a cord running across the prop shaft would be obvious, but a cord just like that you're not familiar with hanging out would not be. You look in there, it's not the first thing that you're noticing
Yeah.
unless it creates a spark. So
And I like breathed on it. It was like
Oh my God.
so terrifying.
it could have been. It could have been the worst of days, but it was
It
quickly
was
resolved.
actually so good. That was such a good day.
Unfortunately, on board there was a replacement cable,
There was. And so
Yeah.
I managed to fix the whole thing on the spot.
and
Wow.
within an hour of I think
You're
finding
like
out that problem, it was resolved.
So this is why we make a good crew, right? Is because between, the three of us, Haley can keep the whole program moving along. Barry's really great at fixing situations in the middle of the shit show.
In situ,
And if you
yeah.
want like a system set up from the ground up properly, you
To
call
not
me,
have-
right? So
yeah.
it's like, we work our way down the chain
But it's
here.
funny because we've actually never had to resolve problems, the three of us all together.
Well,
Oh, it's
Well,
gonna be
we're
except
always
for, like-
one of us is on
well,
the phone.
yeah.
Perihelion
yeah.
on land though, yeah, but like together we've actually never all
We
been
don't-
sailing.
yeah, we
It'll
don't
be,
do much stuff sailing.
it'll
Yeah.
be the trifecta, I think.
It's
Yeah.
been like Simon towing us and us on our ship, but it'll be really fun when we all get to go
I'm
out
so
together.
excited for it,
So
yeah.
let's wrap this
Yeah.
up on some hypotheticals. I want to do a what would you do. So I'll point this
Oh,
at
shit.
somebody.
Okay.
But let's together dream of a.
Can we give them all funny names?
Yeah, of course.
Please. Just
I don't know how to do that.
do it.
Okay, well
Yeah.
let's chat.
So
Haley, we
let's.
got
I
this.
don't know.
We got
I don't know
this.
what you mean, but I'm just gonna
No,
like
we
see.
got this.
So let's say, what's a horrible situation that you encounter at sea?
You get diarrhea and you're the captain.
It's Captain Poo Poo.
So you got horrible
Look.
diarrhea. How do we augment this a bit? You got horrible diarrhea and
Yeah.
the motor just shut off.
And
What do
Captain
you
Poo
do?
Poo won't get off the head.
No,
Or he's
Your
pooping.
deckhand and Captain Poo Poo is
So
nowhere
you
to be
have
seen.
to tell somebody what else to do in this
Right.
scenario.
Okay.
And
So
you're not used
So
to
what's
command
the
because
first
Captain
thing
Poo Poo is
you
Poo
so,
Poo.
do?
so I'll ask you, Simon. You're
Right.
motoring forward,
Yes.
and the motor stops. What's
Right.
your what do you do? What's your
What's the first
what's
thing?
your checklist? What are you doing?
Okay, so honestly, straight up, first thing I would do is turn the key again. And then if it turns the engine over, I know it's not heat fused. So I'll check the temp gauge. It tells me that the engine's not completely ruined. Great, good news. Fantastic. Let's move ahead.
Ooh.
Okay, so now I'm like, is it turning over quickly? If it's turning over quickly, I know I still have electricity. That's great. Love that. So then that really just leaves one thing. Fuel.
Fuel.
9 times out of 10 on a diesel engine, it's fuel. And it'll be an air bubble in the fuel line. It'll be no fuel in the fuel
So you
tank.
go
It'll
to
be
the
a
fuel
dirty fuel in the
filters.
So
filters. It'll be
Yeah.
something.
So you assess it's not water in the fuel. You assess that it's probably water or air in the fuel. What's your next step?
Bleed the
Leave
injectors.
the
Absolutely.
injector. That's what I was gonna
Obviously.
say.
Okay,
So,
so then my question for you,
Yeah.
what do you do if we're sailing, I fall off the boat and the sails are up?
I douse the sails immediately, with the expectation that I know how to douse the sails, which is actually something I'm ashamed to say I don't fully know how to do yet.
Gaff
You
rig.
could untie them and drop them. It'd be
Because
fine.
it actually turns out that a
Jump
lot
out
of
of
the
the
times
way.
when we've been underway, I've been doing the dishes.
Oh no!
We have a lot of dishes, and
Let's fire up that engine,
We
baby.
like
Let's
to
get that
do
engine
so.
going.
So that's correct. You douse the sails.
So I actually in one of our last episodes when we're at the Heritage Harbor Classic and Barry mentions that he lost his jacket, that was actually a man overboard drill.
It was. We
and-
treated it like that.
We did fail.
We had 3 passes at it. Full
Yeah.
sails up, unfortunately.
I was wearing a long skirt and it was windy out. But realistically, because we do not have any freeboard or like what do you call it, the stuff on the side of the
Oh,
boat.
no tow rails or anything.
We don't have
yeah.
tow rails or anything, and
It's slippery.
I personally, we need to replace our lifelines
Yep.
really badly. One of them is held together by Dyneema and it's snapped. I personally do not trust the
Fancy
lifelines
fixes. Yeah.
to fully, like, I trust the brass stanchions and
But
the
the
rigging.
lines themselves are cheap lines.
But
Yeah.
unfortunately, when we were trying to rescue that jacket, our pipe hole, I chose the smaller of the two because we have one that's like probably 4.5, 5 feet, and then we have one that's like 8 feet.
And I had full sails up, so I couldn't slow down. To
We were
anything
going
less than 3
quickly,
knots.
yeah. I fully think that like if it was a person that could have grabbed the pipe hole, I could have saved them. I could have caught them, but because the jacket could not grab, I was like inches away.
victim
Oh,
blame the jacket.
we hit the
all right?
jacket.
I see how it is. I see how
Yeah,
it
I
is.
was so close, but I was not willing to risk my life over a jacket. Like I did not want to risk falling in the water to save Barry's jacket.
So then,
I'm so sorry.
Barry's going to tell us now about how vintage and valuable that jacket
oh, it was a cool jacket.
It was
fun.
totally
Oh,
giving like Marilyn Monroe when I was trying to save the jacket because it was like blowing my skirt in a dramatic way.
Oh,
So
wow.
I challenge you to give me a hypothetical,
Right.
and then of what I would do in a given situation, and then Haley, you also give me a situation, a
Okay.
hypothetical. So
Okay.
you first.
All right, Barry, you are sailing into an unknown harbor. You mistook one of the cardinal buoys and you have now run aground. What's the first thing you do?
What's the first thing I do? I would try reversing off, and assuming that I can't reverse off of that shoal, I would start readying my tender with an anchor, and I would tie that anchor to a halyard, and I would assess the tides, whether they were ebbing or flooding. So do I have time? Is the tides coming up? Will I be lifted off this and back off in 20 minutes? Or is it dropping and I'm getting more screwed by the minute? So if I was getting more screwed by the minute, I would take the tender with an anchor at the top of my mast. I would bring it ashore towards the beach so that as the tide drops, I fall towards the beach, not towards the ocean where the waves keep flooding my boat with ocean. They hit the hull instead when I'm facing the other way, and I can beach the boat safely and wait for the tide to come back up. And while the tide is coming up, I would run an anchor out deeper, and I would start catching myself off while reversing off once the tide got high again.
That was a lot of words. Thank
There-
you for that.
There's one thing you missed.
Oh. Shut the motor off?
No. I think you just do some communication.
Oh,
You call somebody. You
Yeah.
never know. Somebody could run around with a runabout and
It's a great
help you
call.
haul off.
Ask
You
for
know,
assistance.
you got to call them first so that they can get to you quickly enough to make a difference. Because
Yeah.
once you're 2 feet,
Yeah, I
on a
suppose
falling
around
tide.
here, that's a really good call.
Right.
Maybe
it's further away,
Polynesia,
not so
yeah.
much. But yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's just like around here the tides are extreme. So around here you're extra fucked. Somewhere else
If
maybe
it's a
not so much.
falling tide, you're
Yeah, you
toast.
might be in the equator where you have almost no tide, so
Yeah.
then it's not really a big deal.
So I guess my question was actually something we encountered in a previous episode. So relevant.
So I can't remember which episode it was recently, but there was when we were in False Creek, because this was a while ago now.
The guy who was dragging anchor that had the 2 anchors down.
So you're dragging anchor in False Creek and you're that guy. What would you do differently to avoid making your shit somebody else's problem?
I would have fired up my motor and put it idle forward so that I have my boat fighting the wind mildly,
Yeah.
so that I have less pressure on my anchors and I don't make my boat someone else's problem.
Because also,
That
if
would've
you're
been step one.
dragging anchor, but there's nobody in your way, a reasonable solution is to actually put out more scope, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. But in this scenario, that guy could not put more scope out because we were in the way.
He bumped into me a
Yeah.
few times.
But he had, in this example, 2 anchors down, and neither of them were
And
dragging.
he kept asking me to go onto his boat to help him out. I'm like, I'm not
Keep in
leaving my
mind-
boat.
Unfortunately, False Creek is a very, very muddy.
Yeah, it's Cowboy
Yeah.
Central
I
too.
tried to anchor
I've
with
pulled
one of
up
my friends, and
Many articles
mean-
of clothing from the bottom hooked to my anchor.
Yeah.
it took him a couple
Mhm.
times because it's a very muddy bottom. So like,
Yeah.
yeah, just know that like
I guess that really comes around to maybe the last part of trip preparation is make sure you know how to anchor. And if it takes you 3 or 4 times to drop anchor and set it properly, that's the way to do it. Don't just hope that your first time is the only time. It's not going to be. I've had to reset my anchor 3 times a few times. So
Oh, we also just got a comment asking if you had a hole with water flowing through your hull, as it did with the forward water tank, in the middle of the bay, what would you do to fix the situation? So you just have an expulsion of water through part of your hull. What is your immediate?
I trace through the through hulls, shut as many as I can up. If that doesn't fix it, then I rip the boat apart, find where that problem is,
So
and stuff anything into it. T-shirts, logs.
So what Barry's
anything.
saying is know where your through hulls are so you can immediately shut them off. And another part is making sure that your through hulls are in good serviceable order.
Yeah,
that was
open them,
something
close them,
We
grease
had
them.
a problem with on perihelion. They were just outdated and they had started to seize, right?
Most of them didn't turn.
As a seat tow guy, I would say the first thing that I do when I roll up on a scene and some boat's sinking is we get a pump going, or in your case you might have ideally you have a main bilge pump and then a backup, and you ensure that they're running, and then you look at the water level and you look really carefully. It's crazy because you're like panicking. So you want to just sit there and calm your heart and just look at the water level. Is it going up Is it going down or is it staying the same? And that will tell you a lot about what your next few moves are.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Also, a good thing if you see a rising water level inside your boat, it sounds weird and gross.
Drink it.
Taste it.
Drink it, smell it.
Is it salt water or is it fresh water?
Yeah.
Do you just have a leaking tank in your boat?
When
Or
your
are
boat,
you
when you think your
sinking?
boat is sinking and you might be about to die,
It could just
digging
be
your
like-
hand through a bilge and suddenly tasting it doesn't seem like such a bad idea.
Yeah.
Suddenly,
You might be like, oh, thank God it's fresh water. I can
yeah,
relax.
yeah. So chill out. Yeah.
Yeah.
But you know, we've pulled boats off the bottom. We've pulled boats that have been sinking and saved them several times. It's actually a lot less panicked than you'd think it is.
Mm.
It,
This
it's
is
pretty
actually
methodical.
This is why we bought that lithium-ion powered.
We'll
dish
show it
pump.
in an upcoming video because
Yeah.
it's such a handy
It's
little
pretty
tool.
cool.
I
Please
never,
note that they did lose the charger for it, so it is kind of like,
Thanks
Yeah.
for reminding us in the second
But
time this
I
live stream.
I don't.
where'd it go?
I don't like
What
to.
happened?
I don't know.
I don't like
It
to.
has to be somewhere.
I got too much garbage.
I don't like to do.
Behold my land of garbage. No, you should be proud of this garbage.
I
Just
don't-
such nice garbage.
I don't like to do deliveries without a 110 volt ditch pump
Yeah.
and
Way to power it.
and way to power it.
Gas
or-
dish pumps we always keep on the Ceto
However,
boats.
we are absolutely going to do that tomorrow.
We're
But-
doing it with the 100. We're doing it with lithium.
Yeah,
Oh,
we're
okay,
doing
okay.
with one dish pump, but it's just it's very people freak out about that, and honestly, the thing that like it happens all the time. Folks die and then they find their boat still floating around. Like the boat tends to float.
The boat is always more seaworthy than the captain.
You
That
know
is
what
the
I
same,
find
yeah.
the most hilarious thing is that little tender you have behind Old Dog
Yeah,
is so disgusting, but it never sinks, and I feel like that is a metaphor for like persistence in life and like battling the seasonal depression.
he's so disgusting, but he never sinks. He's right
That
here.
boat is like getting me through the winter to see that like nevertheless it persists.
No,
Yeah.
it's true. It's true. It's people. Honestly, it's much more important for you to be calm and relaxed and rational than it is for you to be totally dry. You know,
Yeah.
you're gonna get wet and it's gonna be okay.
Is
the best
there,
advice is always to take a breath and
Yeah.
then
Think it through.
do something.
Is there
And
any,
it's all a 3D chess thing.
any new comments or anything worth dwelling on before we bounce?
I gotta get out of here, man.
Absolutely
Oh
not.
shit, we got a few. Jesus,
Oh.
look at all
Oh, I was
these.
going
Whoa.
to say no, but you can draw them a picture, but I don't think it would matter.
You want me to draw a picture?
It's funny because Popeye's cartoon saw my head and then just lol.
I'm sorry, I don't know what that means, but like lol K.
Yeah, so Alex, Miguel, shove a shirt into it is literally what I've
That's-
done to
that's
a
the-
few of
Yeah.
those.
Anything that
You've
stops
just
it.
jammed a shirt into a through hull that was broken and have saved
Hopefully your
3
through
boats
hull
that way.
does not absolutely just explode out of the side of the boat.
But
I
like
guess it
straight
could
up,
happen.
loads of like manufactured boats have plastic through hulls above the water line, which is totally fine until the water line shifts. And suddenly now you're in a space where. What is that?
I don't know.
But
Did you get in a couple cheeks?
Yeah.
Can you give it titties too?
no, that would be.
Give it a dick. And a big schlong. off the
Okay,
top.
well, I guess what we're saying is, I think this is the end
This is the end.
of.
Thank you so much for
Thank
tuning in.
Julian, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Huge, it's hung
We're
like
going
a
to try and
horse.
do these live streams on Mondays.
But as we are real people,
She's a catch.
it's
but
not
she's hung
always
like a
gonna
spoon,
happen.
You know what I'm saying?
catch us next time on Simon's channel at Finding Simon.
Yeah, we'll be
This
next
is-
Monday at 6 p.m. We will hit that, and it will be probably another Hot Ones or Hot Ones adjacent episode, I'm thinking.
Yeah, we'll do something weird and make you guys love us more.
And if you guys got any suggestions for any of
We don't want to know, cause, or sorry,
Oh
but,
my god,
oh my
really?
god,
No.
that was the wrong
Hold
show.
on.
Wrong show.
No.
Okay.
Never mind. Just ignore that.
We do want to know if you have any suggestions for upcoming podcast themes or ideas you want to hear more about from our perspective.
Would you even like this as a podcast? Because we've been referring to it as
I feel
podcast,
like
but
this
it's
is
definitely a
literally a-
live stream.
Nightmare podcast.
But just know that like potentially we could get our shit
Shipwrecked.
together and we
Shipwrecked.
could create a nice format podcast that won't be
Entirely brutal to listen to.
Or we could make this worse.
Yeah.
We could make it your own
So
personal.
It's up to you
much
guys.
worse.
Hey, you're gonna go in the end the live stream.
Alright, yeah.
Thank you
Okay,
guys.
yeah.
Thank
I'm
you
so
everybody.
sorry.
Thank you everybody for tuning in to Shipwrecked. This is the first episode. Looking forward to seeing you guys at the second episode. Have a good night. Take care.
Sheesh.
She